Hi, welcome to the special edition of the NWI.com Political Roundtable for Tuesday, October 29th. I'm Doug Ross, editorial page editor at the Times, here with Scott Pelath, a state representative from Michigan City, who's also the House Democratic leader. And we should probably talk about, the Indiana House of Representatives, of course, and we should probably talk about how are you going to, you're in a vast minority
Sure.
right now. How do you rebuild that?
Well, that's, got a chance to talk a little bit about this earlier. It's a very exciting time to be an Indiana Democrat because we've had the chance, after a couple rough election cycles, to really refocus on what's most important to us, refocus on a message that we can articulate to Hoosiers, and focus on really providing alternatives. Particularly with respect to economics and growing a more prosperous state. It's allowed us to focus in on those things that we should have been doing for years but didn't have the opportunity. And it's really about helping others in the state, including Republicans when it makes sense, but also critiquing and providing an alternative economic message, which means growing our middle class and helping people trying to get into the middle class. You keep doing that and you attract voters and win friends.
Okay, fair enough. Now, there's obviously we know that there's a Republican supermajority downstate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it easier to get a focused message when you have fewer cats to herd?
I hadn't quite thought of it in that way, but really, it's about recognizing amongst each other what's most important to you and the constituents that you represent, and then secondly, what really is going to put Indiana on a course to being what we all believe that it's capable of. And on the Democratic side of the aisle, we believe that helping business is important. We believe in economic development, but we also believe that in order to have those things, you have to have skilled workers, you have to have a strong middle class that's earning paychecks that they can spend at other businesses to create jobs for their fellow citizens. Too much on the other side of the aisle. I think they only want to think about the investors and what the gang is doing in the boardroom, and they're forgetting that to have a growing economy, you need people out there spending paychecks that they earned at a job that pays pretty well.
Okay, and obviously, other than getting the bosses right, bigger paychecks,
right?
How do you get to that point? You mentioned healthcare as well.
Well, a couple different things we can do to take the pressure off the middle class. The first is taking advantage of our ability to expand healthcare. One thing we cannot afford in this country is medical bankruptcies. We can't afford to keep sending people with no insurance to the emergency room because that ends up costing you and I, the premium payer, and you and I, the taxpayer. And we need the ability to create new jobs. For instance, in the healthcare sector, Indiana Hospital Association saying, expand the healthcare system, 30,000 new private sector jobs, good paying jobs, good paychecks back in a new area of the economy that hasn't been invested in as much. So as we do those things, you take pressure off the middle class and put more disposable income where they are and in their domain. Along with that, we have to allow middle-class workers to be able to fill the jobs that are open right now. That means they need to get new skills. It's not very easy to just say, look, there's going to be new job openings at a business here next year. How am I going to go acquire the skills to go apply for the job there? We're not doing a good job at matching people up with available jobs and making it affordable for them to get new job training without having to sell their future to their kids and grandkids. We've got to do a better job in those regards. And then finally, most importantly, we've got to make sure that every kid has access to an equitable and affordable system of education. And if we do those things, we're going to see our middle class start to blossom. We're going to attract better workers and more successful workers here to our state, and that's what will lift us into a new stratosphere.
Okay. We're hearing a lot about employers cutting back hours and hospital companies even shedding hundreds of jobs, and they're blaming Obamacare.
Right.
As that. So how do you
Well, the fact, okay, here's it. It's always easy to give the one-word blame answer. The fact is that employers have already been cutting back on hours. The fact is that employers already have been struggling to provide health care for their workers. Those things aren't new. We couldn't afford the health care system that we had. And to simply attribute all those things to Obamacare simply isn't accurate. My own employer, we've seen our premiums finally start to level off after years of double-digit increases. Do I believe that that's because of the success of Obamacare? Well, I think it's too early to say that. But what we do, I think, have to have some degree of faith in. If you stop sending everyone in this country who's uninsured to the emergency room, which is wildly expensive and wildly chaotic, for their only health care option, that's finally going to start to rein in costs. As you create more competition from more people participating in the health insurance market, that will help rein in costs if you believe in the free market system and if you believe there shouldn't be free riders out there in the health insurance market. So those are things that are opportunities, and I think too often for ideological or political reasons people want to talk about the cost, but they only want to talk about the costs that they prefer to dwell on. They forget about those emergency room costs, the costs of the uninsured to everybody, and the costs of people not being as healthy because they're not getting the early stage treatment that they need.
Well, since you mentioned early stage treatment, we should look at, so you've got these hospitals that are laying off workers and so forth. Now, is it logical to say Indiana is not putting extra money into educating more doctors, for instance? Is this
right.
An example where they could improve their skill sets, be nurse practitioners or something, and get to the early care?
Well, in response to your question, I don't quite want to get away from the Affordable Care Act yet, because really the Indiana Hospital Association, through their own study they released, said, look, if we do the healthcare expansion here in Indiana, that will add 30,000 private sector healthcare jobs. Those are people like nurse practitioners. Those are nurses. Those are administrators with special skill sets, because we're going to be delivering healthcare in a more sane way. But in addition to that, we have to remember that there's the simple fact that we're already sending our tax dollars to Washington, D.C. to pay for Obamacare. You and I are. Anybody that earns a paycheck, your income taxes are going there. So why are we then saying those dollars should be used in Ohio for people to have health care, or Illinois or Michigan or Kentucky to have health care, and not here in Indiana? Let's get the dollars we're sending out there already back here into Indiana so we can create some jobs.
Okay. We should probably explain when we're talking about healthcare expansion,
right,
that Indiana Governor Mike Pence chose the Healthy Indiana plan,
right,
and chose not to go with the federal Medicaid expansion. You spoke at length about the Medicaid expansion. What are the differences?
Well, the HIP, as we call it, the Healthy Indiana Plan, or Who's Your Insurance Plan. Sometimes people use different nomenclature to describe the letters there. But the fact is, the HIP program is something that was created in a bipartisan manner. It was new cigarette tax revenues to pay for working people without insurance to have private sector health care coverage. The problem with it is we originally thought it would cover about 150,000 people, and it's only ever been at best about a third that number. Governor Pence has said, look, instead of doing the Medicaid expansion like the federal government said we would be allowed to do, let's expand this HIP program. Well, that's great if it works. It's just not going to work. It's never covered the number of people that we thought it would be able to cover, and the federal government probably is not going to let us get away with doing that forever. Now, some should argue that maybe they should or shouldn't. I've always said, look, if that way works, it's a perfectly fine way to do it. But I think the separate question is, why not just do it the way that's already allowable under law, and that's already financed at no cost to the state in the near term? Let's simply take advantage of it like Republican governors in other states have. That's what I've encouraged Governor Pence to do.
Okay, and he hasn't been all that responsive to you, I imagine.
Well, he's polite, but that's not the same as wanting to do it. He truly has a philosophical difference over it. But I think that it's time to get beyond some of our ideological differences and get on to practical problem solving and doing what makes the most sense at the time. What really makes most sense now that our nation has decided that everybody ought to have some minimal level of health insurance, that we ought to make the best out of that.
Okay. And when you talk about ideological differences, we should discuss House Joint Resolution 6,
Sure.
which, of course, would put into the Indiana Constitution the existing state ban against same-sex marriages, but adds a few more nuances
Right.
to it. Would you care to explain that?
Yeah, it's good. It's going to be embarrassing for our state to go down that road. The fact of the matter is people have changed their minds, and people's minds are continuing to change about issues like marriage equality and what rights people ought to have, and should they have the same rights that everyone else does. And people have really given from a few years ago, they've sort of transformed. And they've also seen that other states have allowed marriage equality, and guess what? Western civilization hasn't collapsed. So as was expected, business is going on as usual, and people's lives still have an opportunity to improve. I think for our state to make that sort of a cornerstone issue, to highlight it before the rest of the nation, is going to do the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is retain and attract the best talent to Indiana. We're going to cause ourselves to unnecessarily appear intolerant, and regardless of how people feel about a matter on a moral, religious, or philosophical level, let's just look at the business and economic side of it. That's not going to do anything to make an Indiana business more successful. To double down on our stridency there when the rest of the nation's moving the other way.
And we should add that this week Indiana University joined Cummins and Eli Lilly and some other large employers, really.
Well, I would three of the 20 largest employers in Indiana, right there. You just named them.
They oppose them. Oppose the constitutional ban
because they said, look, if we're trying to get a genius from California to come run our organization, how are we going to be able to attract them if we're deciding to look inhospitable as a state? Okay. It matters to people.
Okay. Well, bottom line, what do you think it all comes down to in the next legislative session?
Well, here's what I would like to see us focus on is let's keep working for the middle class. Let's keep moving forward those issues that are going to make it easier for them to be able to keep their income, save part of it, and spend the rest of it to increase economic activity. And that's going to come down to still looking for ways to expand healthcare coverage here in Indiana, appearing tolerant and avoiding those issues that divide us, and working towards having a first-rate system of education here in Indiana, which is going to include adult education, which is skills development, job retraining, early childhood education so kids get off to a good start in school, and then at the K through 12 level, making sure they have the resources they need to be successful. That's what we need to keep working on. We do that, and have a good climate for people to come up with a new idea and build a business. We'll be a successful state.
Well, it'll be a busy session, and I imagine contentious as well. But they have been lately.
But we're not Washington, D.C. We can still come together on the things we do agree on, and that's what differentiates us.
That's a great thing. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this special edition of the NWI.com Political Roundtable. Thank you for viewing.